As a retired civil engineer, I spent my life building strong foundations, only to watch my own family crumble from the inside out. Last Thanksgiving, they invited me to a lavish dinner in the very house I bought for them. Between the roasted turkey and the expensive wine, I heard my daughter whisper something that shattered my reality. She said the best gift I could give them was to just be gone. I simply packed my bags and smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who took your love for granted and underestimated your worth. Growing up and working in Seattle meant knowing exactly how to weather a relentless storm. But inside this sprawling 3-story mansion, a damp coldness permeated every corner that no winter rain could ever match. It was late on Thanksgiving night. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of sage-roasted turkey and the expensive cigars my son-in-law Derek liked to smoke when he was trying to impress his corporate friends. The guests had all departed their cars long gone from the sweeping circular driveway. The house was finally quiet, settling into the midnight hours. I was standing perfectly still in the shadowy second-floor hallway, looking down at the massive crystal chandelier that cast long distorted shadows across the polished hardwood floors. My heavily calloused right hand gripped the smooth oak banister. My knuckles were white from the tension. For 40 years, I worked as a civil engineer. I built suspension bridges that spanned massive, unpredictable rivers. I constructed towering commercial buildings designed with deep, reinforced pillars to withstand the most violent earthquakes. Because of that lifetime of experience, I was trained to recognize the exact sound and feeling of a foundation cracking under pressure. It is a subtle, dangerous groan, a vibration of a structure that is fundamentally compromised and about to fail catastrophically. I was feeling that exact vibration right now, but it was not coming from the wood, the concrete, or the steel of this magnificent house. It was coming from the kitchen directly below me. The kitchen lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, but from my vantage point on the landing, I could clearly see the silhouettes of my daughter Valerie and her husband Derek. I had originally just come upstairs to grab a warm sweater from the laundry room, intending to head straight back down to my living quarters in the basement. I stopped dead in my tracks when I heard my name spoken with a level of pure venom I had never heard before. The absolute hostility in Valerie's voice physically pinned me to the floor. It was a sharp, spiteful hiss, completely devoid of the sweet, loving, and affectionate tone she always used when she was asking me to cover another one of their maxed-out credit card bills. "He is draining my patience, Derek," Valerie snapped. The sharp clinking of crystal wine glasses punctuated her harsh words. "I cannot handle another holiday pretending everything is fine while he wanders around the house like he owns the place. He is always just there, lurking." Derek sighed a heavy, exhausted, and deeply annoyed sound. He leaned against the imported Italian marble countertop that my life savings had paid for. "We just have to endure it, Val. Keep playing the game a little longer. Keep smiling. You know we need him right now." "Endure it," she scoffed, slamming a silver fork into the sink. "He is suffocating us. I can barely stand to look at him chewing his food at my dining table. The best Thanksgiving gift he could give this family is to just be gone. Permanently. To just be gone. Permanently." Those 5 words echoed in the empty, cavernous hallway, striking me directly in the chest with the force of a physical blow. I closed my eyes, feeling a sudden, intense pressure gripping my lungs. I did not storm down the stairs. I did not shout, scream, or demand a tearful explanation. I just stood there in the suffocating darkness, letting the brutal reality of my situation completely wash over me. This was a highly exclusive, upscale neighborhood in Seattle, a gated community of multi-million-dollar homes with manicured lawns and private security. This specific house, with its custom-built heated swimming pool, its vaulted ceilings, and its state-of-the-art chef kitchen, only belonged to them because of me. Just a little over a year ago, I made the monumental decision to sell the beautiful, modest suburban home I had shared with my late wife for over 30 wonderful years. I took all those precious memories, I liquidated all that hard-earned equity, and I handed over an 80% down payment for this exact mansion. Nearly $1.5 million in liquid cash. It was all the savings of a lifetime handed over with the blind, unconditional love of a father who just wanted to see his only daughter happy and secure. They had promised me with tears in their eyes that I would always have a permanent place here. They begged me to move in using my profound love for my grandchildren as bait. They insisted I needed to be closer to the kids to watch them grow up. They swore to me that I would be the honored patriarch of the household and that I would never want for anything in my twilight years. So I took the basement. I let them have the Grand Master suites, the bright sunrooms, the entire luxurious upper life of the house. I relegated myself to a remodeled basement, entirely convinced that the personal sacrifice of my own space was a small price to pay to keep my family united and close. I looked down at my worn, tired hands that had worked tirelessly through freezing rain, sleet, and blistering summer heat to provide food shelter and private school tuition for Valerie. Hands that had literally signed away my personal independence for her ultimate comfort. And this was my final return on investment. I was entirely disposable. I was a nuisance. I was a bothersome burden that needed to disappear so they could enjoy my money in peace. I listened intently as they chuckled together in the kitchen. I heard the sound of a bottle opening as Derek poured them another glass of expensive red wine, celebrating their little secret toasting to their mutual burden. I quietly let go of the oak banister. I turned around and walked silently down the carpeted back stairs toward the heavy wooden door that led to the basement. Every step I took was deliberate and completely silent. I did not shed a single tear. There was no overwhelming wave of depression, only a sharp, icy clarity forming in my mind. 40 years of high-stakes civil engineering had taught me one absolute, undeniable truth about the world. When a massive structure is fundamentally broken from the inside out, you do not waste your time crying over the cracked walls or the peeling paint. You pull out the original blueprints, you carefully calculate the structural damage, and you bring the entire thing down to the ground with controlled precision. My daughter and my son-in-law had made their desires crystal clear. They wanted me gone. They wanted me erased from the picture so they could claim the throne I built. I decided right then and there, standing in the cold shadows of my basement room, that I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would vanish. But I was not going to leave empty-handed. I was going to take back every single brick, every single dollar, and every ounce of security I had built this fraudulent life with. The demolition had officially begun. The morning after Thanksgiving felt heavier than the thousands of tons of concrete I used to pour. I woke up in the basement, the air still carrying the faint, sickeningly sweet scent of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce from the night before. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the exposed pipes on the low ceiling. I had spent my entire life making sure massive structures held together under immense physical pressure. Now I was preparing to test the absolute limits of my own family. I dressed slowly, deliberately, choosing an old, slightly frayed flannel shirt and faded jeans. I needed to look the part they had written for me. I had to be the frail, fading old man who was slowly wearing out his welcome. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my right knee acting up just enough to give me a noticeable, pathetic limp. The main kitchen was bathed in bright, cheerful morning light. It was a stark, almost blinding contrast to the dark, venomous shadows I had stood in just hours earlier. Valerie was standing by the expensive chrome espresso machine humming a soft tune. She looked perfectly rested, her hair neatly tied back, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater. Derek was sitting at the massive marble island, scrolling through his tablet and sipping a green smoothie. They looked like a glossy magazine cover for the perfect, wealthy American family. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, making sure my voice carried a slight, breathless tremor. Valerie turned around, and instantly a radiant, manufactured smile stretched across her face. "Good morning, Dad. Did you sleep well? You were out like a light last night. We barely heard you come upstairs to get your sweater." "I slept fine, just fine," I replied, shuffling toward the tall oak cabinets. I did not mention the sweater. I did not mention the stairs. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. I reached past the expensive ceramic plates and grabbed a heavy, thick coffee mug. I filled it halfway with dark roast coffee from the glass pot on the counter. The intense heat warmed my stiff fingers. I turned around to face them, my mind sharp, calculating the exact trajectory of the fall. I relaxed my grip. The heavy mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the imported hardwood floor. Hot, dark coffee splashed everywhere, staining the white baseboards and pooling around my old leather slippers. The sharp crash echoed loudly through the large, silent kitchen. "Oh, Dad, do not worry at all. Let me clean that up. You need to rest. You have been looking so tired lately." Valerie was by my side in an absolute instant. Her voice was dripping with a sickly sweet concern that made my stomach churn violently. She grabbed a roll of paper towels and knelt by my feet, dabbing at the spilled coffee with frantic, exaggerated care. There was not a single trace of the cold, ruthless woman who just hours prior had wished for my permanent disappearance. Derek was right behind her. He stood up from his leather stool and placed a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It is completely fine, Dad. Accidents happen all the time. Why do not you go sit down in the living room? You are pushing yourself too hard these days. We have got this completely covered." I looked down at them, playing my part to absolute perfection. I let my shoulders slump forward. I manufactured a look of deep, shameful confusion and vulnerability. "I am so sorry, kids. My hands just gave out on me. I do not know what is wrong with me lately. I am just so incredibly clumsy." Valerie stood up, tossing the soaked paper towels into the stainless steel trash can. She placed her warm hands on my cheeks, looking deeply into my eyes. Her gaze was soft, tender, and completely hollow. "Please do not apologize, Dad. You are our main priority. We just want you to be safe and comfortable. You know we love having you here. You are the absolute rock of this family." I nodded slowly, offering a weak, trembling smile in return. "Thank you, Val. You are a very good daughter." As I walked slowly toward the living room, leaning heavily on my cane for maximum theatrical effect, my mind shifted into a state of cold, clinical analysis. I had spent 40 years inspecting diverse building materials. I knew exactly how to look for microscopic stress fractures in reinforced steel. I knew how to test the tensile strength of concrete before it was ever trusted to hold up a towering skyscraper. Right now, I was looking at the structural integrity of my daughter's soul, and it was entirely compromised. The discrepancy between her midnight confession and her morning performance was a massive, glaring red flag. It was a structural failure of the highest possible degree. When someone smiles at you with dead eyes while cleaning up your mess, it is not an act of love. It is an act of strict containment. They were managing me. They were treating me like a hazardous liability that needed to be pacified until it could be properly disposed of. I sat down in the oversized leather recliner in the living room. From here, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the kitchen through the wide archway. I watched them whisper to each other. I could not hear the exact words, but I could easily read the hostile body language. Derek rolled his eyes, a quick, sharp motion of utter disdain, before violently wiping down the floor with a wet rag. Valerie pinched the bridge of her nose, her posture completely rigid with intense annoyance. The loving mask had slipped the very moment they thought they were out of my line of sight. They truly thought I was losing my mind. They thought the foundation of my intellect was rapidly crumbling, making me entirely blind to their transparent manipulation. But an experienced engineer never stops calculating. I sat in that expensive chair, gripping the armrests tightly, and I began to map out the detailed blueprint of their vast deception. Every fake smile was a load-bearing wall made of rotting, unstable wood. Every sweet word was a faulty, dangerous rivet. They had built this entire luxurious lifestyle on my dime naturally, assuming I would simply fade away quietly into the convenient background. I watched Derek pull out his phone and swipe through his screens with a frantic, nervous energy. He looked incredibly stressed. The kind of deep, gnawing financial stress that I recognized from desperate contractors who had underbid a major project and were quickly running out of cash to cover their lies. Derek was an ambitious man, but raw ambition without competence is a fast track to absolute ruin. I had generously funded his lifestyle, but I had never looked closely at his actual business operations. I blindly trusted my daughter's judgment when she married him. That was my first critical failure. I failed to inspect the soft ground before laying the concrete foundation, assuming family loyalty would somehow protect my life savings from their hidden destructive greed. I remained in my leather recliner for another hour, listening to the muffled sounds of Valerie and Derek moving about the house. They were going through the motions of their perfect Sunday routine, completely unaware that I was now watching them through an entirely different lens. Eventually, I needed space to think clearly. I pushed myself up from the chair and made my way toward the attached 3-car garage. I had a small workbench set up in the corner where I kept my old drafting tools, faded blueprints from my early career, and a few minor woodworking projects. It was the only place in this massive mansion that actually felt like mine. The cool air of the garage was a welcome relief from the toxic atmosphere of the kitchen. I turned on the overhead lights and began organizing a box of loose screws, letting the physical motion calm my racing mind. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent working, grueling overtime, missing holidays, just to ensure my family had a financial safety net. I had built a formidable fortress of wealth, but I had failed to secure the emotional perimeter. 20 minutes later, the heavy fire door connecting the house to the garage creaked open. I did not turn around immediately, but I could hear Derek approaching my workbench. He walked with a heavy rhythm, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant stride. When I finally turned, Derek was standing a few feet away holding a cup of coffee. He had manufactured a look of absolute devastation. His shoulders were slumped forward, his eyes were red, and he was taking shaky breaths. It was a performance worthy of a stage, but I was no longer a willing audience member. "Dad," Derek said, his voice cracking perfectly on the single syllable. "Do you have a minute? I really need to talk to you about something important." I placed my screwdriver down on the workbench and turned to face him, adopting my best expression of grandfatherly concern. "Of course, Derek. What is going on? You look like you have not slept in days." Derek stepped closer, running a trembling hand through his carefully styled hair. He looked down at the concrete floor, shaking his head, as if the burden he carried was simply too heavy to articulate. "It is about little Leo," he whispered, invoking the name of my youngest grandson. "We got some terrible news from his pediatrician yesterday afternoon. That persistent cough he has been having, the one we thought was just a seasonal allergy, it is much worse. They found a dark shadow on his lung scans. I felt a brief, terrifying spike of genuine panic before my analytical mind kicked back in. I knew little Leo. I had spent hours playing with him just 2 days ago. The boy was the picture of perfect health, running around the backyard, with endless energy and breathing with absolute clarity. Derek was using my grandson's fictional illness as a psychological weapon. "What do you mean, a shadow?" I asked, keeping my voice thick with manufactured worry. "What are the doctors saying?" Derek let out a staged, shuddering sigh. "They want to start an aggressive experimental treatment protocol immediately. It is highly specialized, Dad. The problem is that our health insurance absolutely refuses to cover it because it is considered out-of-network and experimental. They are demanding a massive upfront payment before they will even admit him to the facility." Valerie has been crying uncontrollably all morning. We are completely tapped out with the heavy mortgage and the business expenses. We do not know what to do. I watched a single perfectly timed tear roll down Derek's cheek. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. But just like a poorly mixed batch of concrete, it looked solid on the surface while hiding fatal weaknesses underneath. If my grandson were truly facing a life-threatening illness, Valerie would not have been humming a cheerful tune while making espresso an hour ago. She would not have been worried about my spilled coffee. she would have been an absolute inconsolable wreck. Furthermore, I knew exactly how much money they brought in, and I knew how much they spent on luxury cars and designer clothes. The math of their financial distress was the only truthful thing Derek had spoken. "How much do you need, Derek?" I asked softly, playing the role of the desperate, generous patriarch. Derek hesitated, acting as though it physically pained him to ask for financial help. "They need $15,000 by tomorrow morning to secure his spot in the medical program." "I swear to you, Dad, I will pay you back every single penny. The business is about to close a massive, highly profitable deal next quarter. I just need this bridge loan to save my son." "You do not need to worry about paying me back," I said, my voice trembling with fake emotion. "Family comes first. Always. Let us go to my room. I have my checkbook right there." I walked slowly past him, limping heavily, leading the way down to my basement suite. Derek followed close behind his footsteps, now carrying a subtle, eager energy that betrayed his relief. I sat down at my small wooden desk and pulled my leather-bound checkbook from the top drawer. I clicked my pen, hovering it carefully over the paper. This was the ultimate test. I needed to see the monster hiding behind the mask. I carefully wrote out the date. Then, on the numerical line, instead of writing 15,000, I deliberately added an extra zero, making it 150,000. I made my handwriting deliberately shaky and erratic. I signed my name with a messy, illegible scrawl that looked nothing like my usual precise signature. I tore the check from the booklet and held it out toward him with a trembling hand. "Here you go, Derek," I whispered. "Anything for little Leo." Derek reached out and snatched the check from my fingers with astonishing speed. The grieving, desperate father routine vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by raw, hungry greed. He looked down at the slip of paper, ready to celebrate his easy victory. But as his eyes registered the numbers, his expression contorted violently. The greed morphed into pure, unadulterated disgust. He stared at the excessive amount, realizing the bank would immediately flag and reject a check with such an obvious catastrophic error. His jaw clenched tightly. His nostrils flared. For a split second, he forgot I was in the room. The mask fell away completely, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. "You are really losing your mind, old man," Derek muttered under his breath. The words were quiet, but in the silence of my basement room, they rang out like a gunshot. The sheer contempt in his voice was absolutely staggering. It was not a statement of concern for my mental health. It was an expression of extreme annoyance that my supposed cognitive decline was inconveniencing his theft. I sat perfectly still. I had given this man my home. I had funded his life. He felt absolutely nothing. After Derek left the garage, I waited for the tremor in my chest to subside. I was a man of logic, yet the weight of their deception defied all my metrics. I spent another hour organizing my tools, letting reality harden into absolute resolve. When I walked back into the house, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room. I went to the foyer to check the Daily Mail, a simple routine I had maintained for my entire adult life. I opened the brass slot and pulled out a thick stack of envelopes. I sorted through the glossy catalogs, utility bills, and junk mail. Immediately, I noticed something was fundamentally wrong. The first week of this month always brought my financial statements. I expected thick envelopes from my bank investment firm and retirement accounts. They provided the exact balance of the funds actively sustaining this household. Today, there was absolutely nothing bearing my name. I flipped through the stack 3 times, thinking my eyes had perhaps missed a plain white envelope hidden between the junk. They were completely gone. I walked into the kitchen where Valerie was flipping through a magazine. I set the mail on the marble counter with a deliberate thud. Valerie glanced up with an expression of manufactured curiosity. "Is there something wrong, Dad?" she asked, turning a page with a manicured finger adorned with a diamond ring I had paid for. I am missing my bank statements, Valerie, I said neutrally. They always arrive on the 4th. Did you bring in the mail this morning? Valerie let out a soft sigh, closing her magazine. She looked at me with a profound, pitying sadness that made my stomach churn. Oh, Dad. We went through this entire conversation yesterday afternoon. Do you really not remember? I stared at her, feeling a sudden drop in my internal temperature. Remember what, Valerie? She stood up, walking over to me with measured steps, as if approaching a confused child. You brought the mail in yesterday, Dad. You looked at the envelopes, said they were junk, and threw them directly into the recycling bin before the garbage trucks came. I even asked you if you were sure, and you snapped at me. You really do not remember doing that. I looked into my daughter's eyes. They were wide, clear, and perfectly innocent. It was a flawless, terrifying performance. I had not checked the mail yesterday. I had spent the morning running errands and the afternoon fixing a patio gate. I knew with unshakable certainty that my memory was perfectly intact. She was gaslighting me, actively rewriting my reality to make me doubt my own mind. I suppose I must have forgotten, I murmured, lowering my gaze to play the part of the declining patriarch. My memory has been so foggy lately. I am sorry, sweetheart. I did not mean to accuse you. Valerie smiled, a warm expression that hid a dark void. It is perfectly fine, Dad. We know you are getting older and your mind is not as sharp as it used to be. You do not have to worry. Derek and I will always take care of your financial affairs. You just focus on resting. I nodded slowly, turning away before she could see the burning clarity in my eyes. I retreated to my basement suite, sitting in the heavy silence. They were intercepting my financial documents, deliberately cutting off access to my own wealth. The structural sabotage was expanding rapidly, from emotional manipulation to active financial containment. They were building a cage around me. 2 hours later, a gentle knock broke the silence. The door opened and Valerie walked in, carrying a small silver tray. On the tray sat a crystal glass of ice water and a tiny porcelain dish containing my evening medications. Since my mild hypertension diagnosis 5 years ago, I had taken a standard white circular pill every night before bed. It was a basic, harmless routine. "Time for your medication, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I brought it down for you so you would not have to climb the stairs again. Your knees were bothering you earlier." "Thank you, Valerie," I said, reaching for the dish. I looked down at the assortment of pills. My daily vitamin was there, along with my joint supplement. But sitting directly in the center was a pill I had never seen before. It was a pale blue triangle scored deeply down the middle, with tiny numbers stamped on the side. The familiar white pill was gone. Valerie. "What is this blue pill?" I asked, picking it up and examining it under the warm light of my reading lamp. "This is not my usual blood pressure medication." Valerie did not flinch. Her smile was unwavering. "Oh, I meant to tell you about that. Dr. Aris called this morning. He reviewed your chart and decided to switch you to an upgraded generic brand. He said the old medication was causing mild cognitive side effects, and this new formula is much better for your heart and mind. You know Dr. Aris is the best in his field. He just wants what is optimal for your health." Dr. Aris was a private concierge physician who frequently attended Valerie and Derek's dinner parties. He was a smooth-talking, polished man who always seemed more interested in his clients' bank accounts than their actual medical well-being. I had never liked the man, and I certainly had never authorized him to change my prescriptions without a direct consultation. "A new generic brand," I repeated slowly, rolling the blue triangle between my thumb and forefinger. "It feels heavier than the old one." Valerie let out a patronizing laugh. "It is just a pill, Dad. Do not overthink it. Just swallow it down and get some good rest. You have had a long, confusing day, and you need your sleep. I will wait right here to take the glass back up to the kitchen." The trap was set perfectly. She was standing there, physically ensuring that I ingested whatever chemical substance they had decided to introduce into my system. I looked at the glass of water. I looked at the blue triangle. My survival instincts, honed by decades of navigating dangerous construction sites, screamed at me to refuse. But I knew that refusing would break my cover. It would signal to them that I was alert and deeply suspicious. I had to maintain the illusion of absolute compliance. "You are right, sweetheart," I said softly. "I am just overthinking things. I am just a tired old man." I raised my hand to my mouth, concealing the blue pill in the crease of my palm, using a sleight of hand trick I had learned entertaining my grandchildren years ago. I tossed the vitamin and the joint supplement into my mouth, taking a long swallow of the ice water. I tilted my head back, making a pronounced swallowing motion, and let out a satisfied sigh. "Good boy," Valerie whispered. The condescension in her choice of words was physically nauseating. "I will let you sleep now, Dad. Have a wonderful night." She took the empty glass and the silver tray, turning around and walking out of my room. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing me inside the basement. I waited exactly 30 seconds, holding my breath, listening to the rhythmic sound of her footsteps ascending the wooden staircase. When I was absolutely certain she was gone, I opened my tightly clenched fist. The blue triangle sat harmlessly in my sweaty palm. I walked quietly into my attached private bathroom. I turned on the sink faucet, letting the water run loudly to mask any background noise. I took a piece of toilet paper, carefully wrapped the blue pill inside it, and slid it deep into the front pocket of my jeans. Then I flushed the toilet, allowing the rushing sound of the plumbing to echo through the ceiling, completing the perfect illusion that I had dutifully consumed my newly prescribed medication and utilized the restroom before bed. I returned to my living area and sat heavily on the edge of my mattress. The darkness of the basement seemed to press in on me from every direction. I placed my hands flat on my knees and took a deep breath. I closed my eyes and began mentally running through complex mathematical equations. I calculated the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam under extreme thermal stress. I recalled the precise sequential digits of pi to 30 exact decimal places. I mentally reconstructed the intricate blueprints of the first suspension bridge I had successfully engineered back in my early 30s. My mind was a steel trap. It was sharp, clear, and perfectly intact. I was not experiencing a cognitive decline. I was not losing my memory. I was not a confused, fading old man who accidentally threw away his own financial security. Every gear in my brain was turning with flawless, lubricated precision. The horrifying reality of my situation settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket of wet snow. They were not just waiting for me to naturally pass away. They were actively treating me like a helpless dementia patient to create a false narrative. They were intercepting my mail to isolate my finances. And now they were trying to feed me unauthorized, unknown chemical substances through a corrupt, greedy doctor. The unease that had started as a subtle vibration in my chest had now completely solidified into a cold, hard, undeniable fact. I reached into my pocket and touched the small tissue wrapped around the blue pill. This was no longer just a familial dispute over boundaries and respect. This was a calculated attack on my autonomy, my health, and my very existence. They were systematically dismantling the foundation of my life brick by brick, hoping I would simply collapse quietly into the dust. But they had profoundly underestimated the strength of the man they were trying to destroy. I was certainly not going to break. I was going to test this pill, and then I was going to engineer their absolute total ruin. The next morning arrived with a thick blanket of Seattle fog pressing firmly against the massive windows. I maintained my carefully constructed facade of a fragile, declining old man as I slowly navigated the daily breakfast routine. I ate slowly, complained about a phantom ache in my back, and told Valerie I would be resting quietly in the basement. She smiled her terrifying, hollow smile, kissed my cheek, and left for her yoga class. Derek had already departed for his failing office. As soon as the front door clicked shut, my posture straightened. The engineered tremor in my hands vanished completely. Leaving the house was no longer a simple matter of walking out the front door. 3 weeks ago, Derek had hired a specialized crew to install a state-of-the-art smart security system. At the time, he claimed it was to protect the property from a recent rash of neighborhood burglaries. As I walked quietly through the main floor, I took a closer look at the placement of the sleek black domes. A security camera designed to deter intruders is typically angled outward, covering the perimeter, the driveways, and the external access points. These cameras were angled inward. They covered the primary hallways, the kitchen island, the staircase, and the path to my basement door. They were not looking for outside threats. They were looking at me. They were a digital warden, constantly monitoring my every single movement. Fortunately, civil engineers are absolute experts in spatial geometry and intersecting lines of sight. I had already calculated the exact mathematical blind spots days ago. I moved with slow, deliberate precision. I hugged the dining room wall, slipping silently behind the massive china cabinet, completely avoiding the viewing angle of the hallway lens. I reached the side door that led to the utility corridor. From there, I seamlessly accessed the secondary garage exit, a heavy steel door that I knew was not wired to the main alarm grid. I stepped out into the damp, chilly morning air, wrapping my dark trench coat tightly around my shoulders to ward off the biting wind. I did not take my own car. Derek had linked a GPS tracking application to my vehicle under the guise of helping me find it if I ever got lost in a parking lot. Instead, I walked 4 blocks down the winding tree-lined street to the busy main avenue and hailed a passing taxi. I instructed the driver to take me downtown. I needed an independent private toxicology laboratory. I could not risk taking the pill to a standard pharmacy or my regular physician, as Valerie was legally listed as my emergency contact and primary care proxy. She would be instantly alerted to any inquiries I made about my medications. I needed absolute discretion and objective, undeniable data that they could never tamper with. The taxi dropped me off in front of a sterile, unassuming glass and steel building. The directory listed a highly specialized forensic testing facility on the 4th floor. I rode the elevator up, feeling the distinct heavy weight of the blue pill wrapped in tissue inside my right pocket. The reception area was incredibly quiet, bathed in harsh fluorescent light, and smelled faintly of antiseptic chemicals and bleach. I approached the front desk and spoke to a young professional-looking woman in a crisp white coat. I explained that I needed an immediate chemical analysis of an unidentified pill. I requested a priority rush order, explicitly stating that I did not care about the financial cost. She handed me a thick stack of confidentiality forms and a secure plastic specimen bag. I carefully transferred the blue triangle into the bag, sealed it tight, and handed over $500 in cash to ensure anonymity. She told me the rapid analysis would take approximately 90 minutes. I took a seat in the waiting area, choosing a stiff vinyl chair in the far corner. I folded my hands patiently in my lap and allowed the deep silence of the room to completely envelop me. 90 minutes is a very long time to wait when your entire life is hanging in the balance, but patience is a fundamental virtue forced upon every successful builder. As I sat there watching the minute hand tick forward, my mind drifted back to my years in the field. I thought about a massive commercial project I oversaw in the late 1980s. We were constructing a 50-story office tower in a highly active seismic zone. The primary contractor for the foundation was a smooth-talking, charismatic man who dressed in expensive tailored suits and always had a reassuring smile on his face, very much like Derek. He assured me repeatedly that the concrete mixture he was pouring for the foundational pillars was the absolute highest grade available, heavily reinforced and perfectly mixed to withstand any possible shear force from an earthquake. He brought me beautifully forged safety certificates and smiled warmly while pouring me expensive scotch in his lavish office. But I never trusted the salesman. I only ever trusted the hard science. When his crew went home for the weekend, I went down into the muddy excavated pit with my own heavy testing equipment. I drilled a solid core sample straight out of his freshly cured concrete pillars. I took that heavy cylinder of gray stone to an independent testing facility exactly like this one. The resulting data from that test was utterly terrifying. The concrete was entirely substandard, illegally mixed with excess sand and cheap filler to save him millions of dollars in material costs. If we had built the massive tower on that weakened foundation, the very first major tremor would have brought the entire 50 stories crashing down to the street, resulting in an unimaginable, catastrophic loss of human life. I fired that corrupt contractor on the spot, sued his firm into oblivion, and ordered my crew to tear out every single inch of his rotten concrete. You cannot build a stable future on a compromised foundation. You simply cannot accept a warm, friendly smile as a substitute for true structural integrity. Now sitting in this cold, sterile waiting room, I realized I was doing the exact same thing. Valerie and Derek were the smooth-talking contractors of my personal life. They had presented me with a flawless, beautifully painted facade. They had promised me a secure, comfortable, and deeply loving environment for my final years. But the structural integrity of their purported love was highly suspect. The conveniently missing bank statements, the vicious, condescending whispers in the night, the hidden indoor security cameras, and now this highly mysterious blue pill. These were all massive, glaring, undeniable fractures in the concrete. I had to drill down deep into the core of their deception. I had to scientifically test the materials they were feeding me. I could not rely on my daughter's sweet, affectionate voice or my son-in-law's firm, reassuring handshake. I had to rely strictly on the cold, hard, indisputable science of a forensic chemical analysis. The wall clock ticked steadily onward. 45 minutes passed. Then 60. I was not a frightened, confused, elderly man waiting for a terrifying terminal medical diagnosis. I was a seasoned, rational engineer waiting for a standard stress test report. I mentally prepared myself for every possible outcome. If the pill was simply a harmless vitamin, a genuine benign mistake on Valerie's part, I would peacefully adjust my calculations and try to mend the bridge. But if the pill was exactly what my gut feeling told me it was, I would need to initiate a full-scale, uncontrolled demolition of my own family. I would have to become as cold and ruthless as the steel beams I used to weld together. Finally, after exactly an hour and 20 minutes, the heavy wooden door behind the reception desk swung open. A senior toxicologist emerged from the back lab. He held a thick manila folder scanning the small waiting room until his eyes locked onto mine. His expression was incredibly grave, tight, with a profound, undeniable professional concern that sent a sudden icy shiver straight down my spine. He did not smile. He did not offer any false, polite comfort. He walked toward me. I stood up slowly to meet him, squaring my shoulders and bracing my legs firmly against the ground. I was ready to find out what kind of poison my daughter was trying to build her future upon. The toxicologist stopped 2 feet away from me. He adjusted his glasses, looking at me not as a paying client, but as a potential victim of a terrible crime. "Mr. Bennett," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to come back to my private office right away. What we found in this sample is highly regulated, incredibly dangerous, and entirely inappropriate for a man of your age." The foundation had officially cracked forever. I followed the toxicologist into his private office, a small, immaculately organized space that smelled faintly of sterile alcohol and old paper. He gestured for me to sit across from his heavy metal desk. He opened the manila folder, his eyes scanning the dense data sheets for a few silent seconds before looking back up at me. His expression was tight, guarded, and filled with a deep professional alarm. He asked me if I had a documented medical history of violent schizophrenic episodes or severe, unmanageable psychotic breakdowns. The question was so incredibly absurd, so entirely disconnected from my actual reality, that I simply stared at him for a long, quiet moment. I told him I had absolutely no such history. I explained that I was a retired civil engineer with mild hypertension and a minor joint ache in my right knee. I told him that I had never suffered a single psychological issue in my entire 70 years of life. The toxicologist let out a long, heavy sigh, sliding a printed chemical breakdown across the smooth surface of the desk. He pointed a pen at a complex string of molecular data. He explained in a steady, grim voice that the blue triangular pill I had brought him was not medication for blood pressure. It was a highly potent, off-label antipsychotic sedative. It is a heavy, strictly regulated pharmaceutical compound, typically administered in secure, locked psychiatric wards to physically and chemically subdue highly aggressive, out-of-control patients. He looked me directly in the eyes and told me that if a healthy 70-year-old man were to take this specific dosage on a daily basis, the physiological and neurological side effects would be absolutely devastating. Within a week, I would experience severe, unshakable lethargy. Within a month, my short-term memory would begin to completely disintegrate. I would suffer from extreme mental confusion, a drastic loss of fine motor skills, and severe cognitive symptoms that perfectly mimic rapid-onset dementia. I sat perfectly still in the stiff vinyl chair, absorbing the sheer, horrifying weight of his clinical words. My mind processed the data with the cold, ruthless efficiency of a structural stress test. Valerie and Derek were not just passively waiting for me to naturally pass away so they could comfortably inherit my accumulated wealth. They were not merely intercepting my bank statements to isolate me financially and keep me in the dark. My own flesh and blood, the daughter I had raised, protected and provided for, was actively, methodically poisoning me in my own home. They were intentionally, chemically lobotomizing me. They wanted to systematically erase my intellect, wipe away my memories, and strip me of my agency. They intended to reduce me to a drooling, compliant, vegetative shell of a human being. It was an act of profound, unimaginable cruelty. They were engineering a completely fabricated medical reality where my eventual, inevitable decline would seem entirely natural and tragic to any outside observer. Dr. Aris, their polished, wealthy, arrogant friend, was clearly a willing, compensated accomplice in this malicious pharmaceutical conspiracy. The betrayal was so incredibly deep, so fundamentally evil and vile, that it completely bypassed my capacity for normal human grief. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the desire to scream or break down in despair. The profound sorrow that had been welling up inside my chest since Thanksgiving night instantly evaporated. It was entirely replaced by a cold, searing, and absolute rage. But it was not a reckless, explosive anger. It was the precise, highly controlled fury of a veteran architect who suddenly realizes a major structure has been maliciously rigged to fail by the very people he hired to protect it. I looked at the toxicologist, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any fragile tremor. I asked him to print a certified, legally binding copy of the full toxicology report. I needed it officially signed, stamped, and authenticated for potential high-level legal proceedings. He nodded gravely, clearly understanding the dark, criminal implications of my specific request. As he turned to his computer to prepare the official documents, I felt a massive, irreversible shift take place within my own mind. The heartbroken, accommodating, and desperate father I had been for the past 3 years officially ceased to exist. I was no longer the generous patriarch who was desperately trying to buy his family's affection and loyalty with $1 million mansion. That naive man had permanently died in this cold, sterile office. In his place stood a cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless tactician. I had spent 4 decades of my professional career identifying hidden structural vulnerabilities and holding corrupt, negligent contractors completely accountable for their dangerous actions. I knew exactly how to build an airtight, undeniable case against people who cut corners, forged documents, and violated the law. Valerie and Derek had initiated a hidden war of attrition against me naturally, assuming I would be an easy, oblivious, and defenseless target. They thought my age made me a fool. They had absolutely no idea they were dealing with someone who knew exactly how to dismantle their entire luxurious world brick by brick, beam by beam. The toxicologist handed me the official sealed report in a thick tamper-proof envelope. I paid the remaining balance of his fee in cash, sincerely thanked him for his profound diligence and extreme discretion, and placed the critical document securely into the inner breast pocket of my heavy trench coat. I walked out of the laboratory, taking the elevator down to the ground floor, and stepped back out into the dense, chilling Seattle fog. The damp, freezing air felt incredibly refreshing against my heated face. I walked to the corner of the busy intersection and hailed another taxi to take me back to the wealthy gated neighborhood. As the cab navigated through the winding, rain-slicked streets, my mind was rapidly racing with complex strategic calculations. I needed to gather far more evidence before I made my final move. I needed to meticulously map out the entire scope of their financial, personal, and medical conspiracy before I triggered the final catastrophic collapse of their lives. I knew with absolute and unwavering certainty that I had to return to that massive house and continue playing the pathetic role of the frail, forgetful, and rapidly declining old man. It would require an absolute Oscar-worthy performance from me. I had to smile warmly at my treacherous daughter as she handed me literal poison on a polished silver tray. I had to nod graciously at my deceitful son-in-law as he actively squandered my hard-earned money on his truly mysterious emergencies. I would let them feel incredibly comfortable, wildly victorious, and completely secure in their deeply arrogant deceit. I would let them confidently believe they had successfully outsmarted me. Because when a massive towering foundation is finally destroyed, the resulting physical collapse is always sudden, extremely violent, and absolute. I was going to let them build their arrogant, incredibly greedy tower a little bit higher into the dark sky just so the eventual, inevitable fall would completely and utterly obliterate them forever. The long taxi ride back to the neighborhood felt completely different today. I was a master architect, drafting a demolition protocol. I exited the cab a block away to avoid the motion sensors. I slipped through the utility door silently. I walked down to my basement suite and hid the certified toxicology report in my workbench. Then I calmly prepared for the performance of a lifetime. When I heard the front door close upstairs, I initiated the protocol. I messed my hair, untucked my shirt, and adjusted my posture, mimicking the defeated slump of a man whose mind was slipping away. I walked up the stairs with a shuffling gait, dragging my right foot. Valerie was quietly unpacking groceries. She looked up as I entered. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying that sickeningly gentle tone. "Did you rest down there?" I did not answer immediately. I let my eyes wander. I blinked slowly, letting my jaw hang slack. "I was looking for the dog." I mumbled, my voice raspy and intentionally disjointed. "Did you let Buster out?" We had not owned a dog in over 15 years. Valerie froze. The blue pill was supposedly working its magic. "Dad," she said softly, stepping closer. "Buster has been gone for a long time. You just need some more rest." I moved aimlessly toward the living room. I spent 2 hours perfecting the illusion. I tried to use the television remote to answer the phone. I asked Valerie what time my late wife was coming home. Every time I slipped into this fabricated dementia, I watched my daughter. She was absolutely thrilled. Later, Derek returned. I heard them whispering furiously in the foyer, exchanging notes on my cognitive decline. I decided to escalate the performance to establish a history of dangerous incompetence. I walked into the kitchen, turned the stove on high, and placed an empty tea kettle on it. Then I simply walked away, shuffling back to my recliner and closing my eyes. Within minutes, the smell of burning metal filled the air. The smoke detector began to shriek. Derek shouted, rushing into the kitchen. He turned off the gas and threw the smoking kettle into the sink, where it hissed angrily. He stomped into the living room, his face flushed with intense anger. "Dad!" Derek yelled aggressively, waving his hands to clear the smoke. "What are you doing?" "You left the stove on with an empty kettle." I opened my eyes, blinking rapidly in exaggerated confusion. "I wanted some tea," I whispered, my voice trembling with artificial fear. "I am so sorry. I completely forgot." Valerie walked into the room, fanning the air. She exchanged a deliberate look with Derek. It was a look of triumphant victory. They communicated volumes in that single smirk. They finally had their narrative. The old man was a danger to himself. He desperately needed a legal guardian to freeze his assets. "It is okay, Dad," Valerie said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "We are going to take over all of your important responsibilities now. We will handle the complex finances, the house, absolutely everything. You just go to your quiet room and rest." "Thank you," I mumbled softly, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. "My tired head feels so incredibly heavy right now." "That is just the new medication working to heal your heart," Valerie lied smoothly. "Go to sleep." I dragged myself slowly down the stairs, closing the heavy basement door behind me. As soon as the metal latch clicked shut, the pathetic old man vanished. I stood up straight, my mind racing with absolute clarity. I walked over to my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. Tucked beneath a false panel was a prepaid burner phone I had purchased for emergencies. I powered it on. I dialed a private number I had memorized over 2 decades ago. The line rang 3 times before an authoritative voice answered. "Mitchell and Associates," the serious voice said. "Mitchell, it is, Harrison." I spoke clearly, my voice devoid of weakness. "I am calling you on an untraceable line. Do not call my primary cell phone." Mitchell, my private wealth attorney and oldest friend, immediately recognized the gravity of my tone. He knew I only used protocols exactly like this, when the stakes were absolute. Harrison Mitchell said, his professional demeanor snapping into place. "What is the situation? Are you in physical danger?" "I am secure, but my perimeter has been breached from the inside," I replied coldly. "My daughter and her husband are attempting to drug me with heavy antipsychotics to induce dementia symptoms. They want to declare me incompetent and seize my estate." I heard Mitchell take a sharp breath. "Do you have hard evidence?" he asked. "I have a certified toxicology report from an independent forensic laboratory confirming the dangerous substance," I stated. "I also have documented proof of financial interception. They are hiding my bank statements. I need to initiate a total asset lockdown. I want every single account frozen, every trust sealed, and every line of credit severed. I want to build a legal fortress around my wealth." "I will draft the emergency injunctions tonight," Mitchell said, his voice hard with fury. "We can lock them out of the primary accounts by tomorrow morning, but you need to get out of that house immediately. If they are poisoning you, they are unpredictable." "No," I said firmly. "If I leave now, they will claim I wandered off in a delirium. They will call the police and cement their narrative. I am staying right here. I will continue playing the heavily sedated fool. I want them to feel invincible. I want them to commit their fraud on paper so we can destroy them completely." "You are playing a dangerous game, old friend," Mitchell warned. "I have managed dangerous structures my entire life," I replied. "We need to meet covertly to transfer power of attorney exclusively to your firm." Tomorrow afternoon, Valerie has her weekly charity luncheon. Derek will be at his office. I will slip out. "There is an old diner 3 miles from your location," Mitchell suggested. "The Rusty Spoon. It is cash only and far off their radar. I will be sitting in the back booth at exactly 2 o'clock. "I will be there," I confirmed. "Have the asset freeze documents ready. Have the disinheritance paperwork prepared. And Mitchell, yes, Harrison, bring a private investigator with you. I want every single financial transaction Derek has made over the last 3 years subjected to a microscopic forensic audit. I want criminal charges drafted for every single cent he has stolen." "Consider it done," Mitchell promised. I ended the call and removed the battery from the burner phone, sliding the pieces back into the hidden compartment. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the muffled footsteps of my daughter and son-in-law walking above me. They were upstairs, walking on floors I had purchased, dreaming of wealth they had not earned. They thought they were the brilliant architects of my demise. They did not realize they had just handed the blueprints of their own destruction to a master builder. To maintain my carefully constructed illusion, I had to completely suppress my disgust the following morning. I found Derek in the kitchen and apologized profusely for my ridiculous mistake with the checkbook. I blamed my failing eyesight and tired mind. With perfectly simulated trembling hands, I wrote him a new clean check for exactly $15,000. Derek accepted it instantly. The mask of the grieving, desperate father slid right back onto his face. He thanked me, swearing that this money would save my grandson from the shadow on his lungs. I nodded, playing the part of the foolishly generous patriarch, knowing full well that this single slip of paper was about to become the primary tracking device for his financial ruin. By Friday evening, the house was buzzing with a frantic, superficial energy. Valerie and Derek were preparing to attend a lavish, high-society charity gala in the city. They were dressed in stunningly expensive designer clothing, draped in luxury items that my lifetime of hard work had unknowingly subsidized. Valerie walked down to the basement wearing a glittering emerald gown. She carried her small silver tray with the glass of ice water and the deadly blue triangle pill. She watched me closely as I performed my sleight of hand trick, pretending to swallow the heavy sedative. She smiled. Her hollow, terrifying smile kissed my forehead and told me to rest quietly. As soon as she walked back upstairs, I spat the pill into a tissue and flushed it down the toilet. I stood by the small basement window watching their luxury sedan pull out of the long, winding driveway. They thought they were leaving behind a heavily sedated, compliant victim. They were entirely wrong. The moment their taillights disappeared around the corner, my burner phone vibrated. Mitchell was waiting 2 blocks away with his specialized security team. I gave them the clear signal. 10 minutes later, an unmarked, dark gray utility van rolled silently up the driveway. 2 men wearing plain dark clothing stepped out. They moved with incredible speed and professional efficiency, bypassing the inward-facing security cameras by utilizing the exact mathematical blind spots I had mapped out for them earlier that week. I let them in through the secondary garage door. They carried heavy black cases filled with microscopic surveillance technology. As an engineer, I possessed an intimate, comprehensive knowledge of this mansion. I knew every structural beam, every load-bearing wall, and every single inch of the extensive HVAC system. I did not just let these men wander the house blindly. I became the absolute master architect of my own counter-surveillance grid. We started in Derek's private home office. It was a massive room filled with dark mahogany furniture, leather chairs, and expensive abstract art. The security technicians began pulling out tiny, incredibly sophisticated audio and visual recording devices. I directed the lead technician to the primary air conditioning return vent located directly above Derek's heavy desk. I explained that the specific acoustic geometry of the galvanized steel ductwork would naturally amplify the sound of any conversation taking place in the room, creating a flawless acoustic funnel. The technician nodded, clearly impressed, and mounted a microscopic audio bug just inside the vent grate, rendering it completely invisible to the naked eye. Next, I pointed to the thick, ornate crown molding running along the ceiling perimeter. We embedded a pinhole camera directly into the intricate woodwork, angling the high-definition lens to capture a perfect, unobstructed view of Derek's computer screen and his locked filing cabinet. We then moved to the main living room, the primary staging area where Valerie and Derek usually conducted their private, venomous conversations about my mental decline. I instructed the second technician to utilize the decorative lighting fixtures mounted high on the stone fireplace. The heat generated by the bulbs would normally interfere with cheap surveillance equipment, but the military-grade sensors Mitchell had procured were completely immune to thermal disruption. We placed 2 additional wide-angle cameras perfectly camouflaged within the dark bronze housing of the light fixtures. Every single whisper, every treacherous smirk, and every cruel manipulation they exchanged in this house would now be captured, recorded, and securely transmitted to an encrypted offshore server controlled exclusively by Mitchell's firm. They had built a digital cage to monitor me, so I simply rewired the entire infrastructure to monitor their absolute guilt. While the security team meticulously finalized the wiring and tested the encrypted transmission signals, Mitchell walked through the kitchen door. He was holding a thick, securely sealed leather briefcase. We sat down at the massive marble island exactly where Derek had sat, while feeding me his fabricated medical emergency. Mitchell opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of dense financial reports. He looked at me, his eyes hard and unyielding. The forensic accountant had completed the preliminary trace on the $15,000 check I had handed to Derek. Mitchell explained the precise trajectory of the funds. The money did not go to a specialized pediatric hospital. It did not go to an experimental respiratory treatment program. It did not go anywhere near my supposedly sick grandson. The moment Derek deposited the check, the funds were immediately transferred to a generic, obscure holding company registered in Delaware. From there, the money was instantly wired to a high-risk commercial lender to temporarily stall a massive defaulting loan. Derek was drowning in severe, unmanageable corporate debt. His ambitious, independent contracting business was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate. He had taken out predatory loans to cover his operational losses and fund his lavish personal lifestyle. Little Leo was perfectly healthy. The entire story about the dark shadow on his lungs was a sickening, emotionally abusive lie designed exclusively to extort capital from a man they believed was losing his mind. They had weaponized my love for my own grandson to pay off a desperate financial hemorrhage. But the forensic audit did not stop with Derek. Mitchell slid another stack of papers across the cold marble counter. These were detailed records of Valerie's recent spending habits, cross-referenced with the banking statements she had been systematically stealing from my mail. My daughter, the woman who smiled sweetly while handing me powerful sedatives, had been silently transferring massive sums of my liquid assets into hidden private trusts under her sole control. She had forged my signature on multiple wire transfers, claiming she was managing my estate due to my declining cognitive health. She was actively bleeding my primary accounts dry, purchasing high-end real estate investments in foreign markets, and securing her own wealthy future while quietly preparing to lock me away in a secure psychiatric facility. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was physically staggering. I looked down at the forensic documents, seeing the cold, hard numbers that detailed the absolute moral bankruptcy of my own flesh and blood. They were not just negligent. They were highly active, deeply malicious predators. They were chemically lobotomizing me to ensure I could never testify against their massive financial fraud. Every single smile, every warm hug, and every cup of coffee was a calculated tactical maneuver in their long con. I felt a deep, resonant coldness settle into my bones. The rage I had felt in the toxicology lab was no longer a burning fire. It had transformed into solid, impenetrable ice. The lead security technician walked into the kitchen holding a small digital tablet. He nodded to Mitchell and me, confirming that the surveillance grid was fully operational and transmitting perfectly. We tested the audio feeds, listening to the crystal-clear, echoing silence of the empty house. The trap was perfectly set. The steel jaws were open and waiting. Mitchell packed his heavy leather briefcase, placing his hand firmly on my shoulder. He promised me that the legal documents for the total asset freeze were ready to be filed the moment I gave the final command. I thanked him, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. The security team and my attorney exited through the garage, melting into the dark Seattle night without leaving a trace of their presence. The house was once again perfectly silent. I walked slowly back down the stairs to my basement suite. I lay down on my bed, staring up at the low ceiling. I knew that in a few hours, Valerie and Derek would return from their glamorous gala. They would walk through the front door feeling incredibly victorious and completely untouchable. They would likely pour themselves expensive drinks and laugh about the pathetic, sedated old man sleeping quietly in the basement. They would discuss their debts and stolen wealth, entirely unaware that the walls were listening. They thought they had buried me alive under a mountain of lies and chemical restraints. But an engineer knows that pressure builds continuously until a critical failure point is reached. I closed my eyes, feeling calm. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. I woke up the next morning before the sun crested the Seattle skyline. The heavy gray clouds mirrored the cold ice that encased my heart. I sat at my small basement desk, my laptop glowing in the dim light. At precisely 6, an encrypted email arrived from Mitchell. The attached file contained the comprehensive findings from the forensic accountant. I opened the document ready to analyze the structural failure of Derek's supposed business empire. The truth was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. Derek did not have a struggling tech startup. He had absolutely nothing. The audit revealed his company officially filed for bankruptcy over 2 years ago. For 24 months, he had been wearing an expensive tailored suit and driving to an empty leased office simply to maintain the grand illusion. He was playing dress-up with my money. But the most devastating revelation was the trajectory of the $15,000 check I had given him just 2 days prior. The money meant to save my grandson from a terrifying respiratory illness did not go toward medical bills. It did not go toward his corporate debt. The forensic trace showed the funds bouncing through 3 shell accounts before landing in a property management ledger in Florida. Derek had used the money to pay the quarterly lease on a luxury beachfront condominium in Miami. The primary occupant of that expensive apartment was a 24-year-old woman with no visible income. Derek was not just a liar and a thief. He was funding a secret, extravagant life with a young mistress using the money I handed over to save his child's life. The breathtaking depravity of using little Leo as a pawn to finance his infidelity was a testament to a man who possessed no moral center. He was a hollow, rotting pillar, incapable of supporting anything real. I closed the laptop, letting the chilling reality settle. I wondered how Valerie would react when I finally dropped this massive explosive on her perfectly curated life. I assumed she would be humiliated and heartbroken by her husband's profound betrayal. I still harbored a microscopic fragment of hope that my daughter was simply a victim of a manipulative man. That microscopic fragment of hope was brutally eradicated later that very same evening. Around 9 o'clock, the house grew quiet. I sat in my dark basement wearing high-fidelity headphones connected to the encrypted receiver. The digital audio feed was completely pristine, capturing every sound from the living room directly above me. I could hear the clinking of ice in heavy crystal glasses. I heard the rhythmic sound of Valerie pacing across the hardwood floor. Then I heard her voice. It was not sweet or condescending. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with venom. I saw the credit card alert. Derek, Valerie said, her words slicing through the quiet room. You bought her another diamond tennis bracelet. We agreed you would keep your Miami expenses strictly out of our primary accounts until this is completely finished. I froze, pressing the headphones tighter against my ears. My breathing slowed to an absolute standstill. Valerie knew. She knew everything. Derek sighed loudly, a sound of deep, exhausted irritation rather than guilt. It was a careless mistake, Val. The transaction simply defaulted to the wrong card on file. I will transfer the funds back in the morning to balance the ledger. You do not need to hover over my shoulder like an auditor. Hover over your shoulder, Valerie hissed, her voice rising in pitch. We are one microscopic misstep away from securing absolute financial freedom, and you are acting incredibly reckless. If my father somehow notices the missing funds, this entire plan falls apart. I am not risking my future just so you can keep your young toy happy. The silence that followed was heavy and saturated with a sickening, toxic understanding. There was no weeping, no screaming about infidelity, and no threats of divorce. This was a completely transactional negotiation between 2 entirely corrupt business partners. Valerie was not a victim. She was the primary architect. Look at me, Derek said, his tone shifting into a smooth, placating rhythm. I know this has been stressful for both of us, but we are right at the finish line. The new medication is already making him incredibly lethargic. He left the stove on yesterday. He did not even remember throwing away his own bank statements. His mind is basically gone. Just endure it for 1 more month. Once we get the old man permanently out of the picture, you get 70% of his $8 million estate. Then we both get exactly what we want. You get the house and the absolute freedom to travel, and I get the capital I need. I heard the soft rustle of clothing. 1 month, Valerie whispered, her voice losing its angry edge, replaced by a dark, hungry anticipation. The lawyer said the guardianship paperwork will be ready to file next week. We just need one major incident to prove he is a total danger to himself. Something undeniable. Then we move him to the memory care facility upstate. They keep their patients heavily medicated. He will not even know his own name by Christmas, and we take control of everything. Derek agreed smoothly. Just stick to the script, Val. Keep giving him the blue pills. Keep smiling. We have already won. I pulled the headphones off, tossing them onto the desk. The silence in the basement roared in my ears. I stood up, feeling a strange, terrifying sense of absolute calm wash over me. The final lingering thread of parental love I held for the woman upstairs simply snapped, dissolving into nothingness. My daughter was not just passively enabling a thief. She was actively orchestrating my physical destruction to expedite her inheritance. She was willing to poison her own father, lock him in a chemical prison, and tolerate her husband's blatant infidelity, all for a 70% cut of my wealth. They had perfectly quantified my entire existence. They had weighed 40 years of my blood sweat and tireless devotion, and decided it was worth far less than the convenience of my sudden disappearance. They thought they were brilliant, untouchable, and completely in control of the narrative. They believed my mind was shutting down, rendering me a silent participant in my own funeral. I walked over to the small mirror hanging above my bathroom sink. I looked at the deep lines etched into my face, the gray in my hair, and the dark bags under my eyes. I looked like an old, tired man. But staring directly into my own pupils, I saw the reflection of a man who had built towering structures designed to withstand hurricane-force winds. I saw a man who understood pressure leverage and the exact mechanics of total structural collapse. I was no longer a heartbroken father, desperately searching for a reason to forgive his flawed family. I was the executioner. I had the raw data. I had the financial records. I had the audio recordings capturing their malicious intent. I sat in the darkness of my basement suite for the next 3 days, meticulously cataloging every word that passed through the hidden microphones. I was no longer a father trying to salvage a relationship. I was an investigator building an airtight criminal case. On Thursday night, I had my headphones securely over my ears, listening to the crystal-clear audio feed transmitted from the main living room. The digital clock on my laptop read 11:45. Valerie and Derek were settling into the leather couches directly above my head. I heard the rustle of heavy paper being spread across the coffee table. Derek was speaking in a low, excited tone. He told Valerie that the paperwork was finally complete. I leaned forward, increasing the volume on the receiver. Derek explained that the initial $15,000 he had stolen from me was merely a temporary bandage to keep his creditors away. His actual debts were astronomical. He needed an injection of capital far more than the cash Valerie had been quietly siphoning from my checking accounts. Derek presented his ultimate financial solution. He laid out the blueprints for a staggering act of corporate fraud. Decades ago, I purchased 3 large commercial properties in the industrial district. These were massive, highly profitable warehouses that I owned completely free and clear of any mortgages. They were the crown jewels of my investment portfolio, generating a steady stream of passive income. Derek told Valerie he had secured a corrupt notary and a desperate commercial lender willing to overlook missing details. Derek was forging my signature to cross-collateralize all 3 commercial properties. He was secretly taking out a massive multi-million-dollar loan against the buildings I had purchased. He planned to use those stolen millions to wipe out his bankrupt business debts, fully fund his luxury lifestyle in Miami, and leave the massive loan for me to default on. Valerie did not gasp. She did not object to the sheer criminality of forging her own father's signature. Instead, she asked a chillingly practical question. She wanted to know how they would prevent me from noticing the sudden liens placed against my assets. Derek let out an arrogant laugh. He told her she did not need to worry about my interference because I would not have the legal capacity to challenge the loans. This was where their plan shifted from simple financial theft into something profoundly evil. I heard the front door chime echo through the audio feed. A third voice entered the living room. It was smooth, polished, and sickeningly familiar. It was Dr. Aris, the private physician who had prescribed the lethal blue pills. He greeted them warmly, accepting a glass of expensive scotch. I sat frozen in my chair, listening as they casually discussed the complete eradication of my human rights. Dr. Aris confirmed that the heavy antipsychotic sedatives were working exactly as intended. He noted that my recent confusion, my lethargy, and the incident with the burning kettle provided the perfect, undeniable foundation for a medical diagnosis of rapid-onset dementia. Valerie eagerly agreed, stating that my mind was completely gone and that I was becoming a severe danger to myself and others. Derek revealed the terrifying endgame. They were preparing to take me to court to establish a total, irrevocable legal conservatorship. They were compiling an entirely fabricated medical dossier signed and authenticated by Dr. Aris, declaring me legally incompetent to manage my personal and financial affairs. Derek explained that once the judge signed the conservatorship order, my signature would be completely meaningless. Derek and Valerie would be granted absolute, unchecked legal authority over every single penny I owned, every property in my name, and every decision regarding my physical health. The sheer magnitude of the conspiracy made the air in my lungs feel incredibly thin. A conservatorship meant I would be stripped of my basic civil liberties. I would not be able to hire a lawyer, access my own bank accounts, or choose where I lived. I would become a prisoner of the state with my treacherous daughter and thieving son-in-law acting as my absolute wardens. But the most sickening detail was yet to come. Valerie asked Dr. Aris where they should place me once the court order was finalized. She casually mentioned a few high-end luxury retirement communities in the surrounding area. She assumed that since they were stealing millions, they would at least provide me with a comfortable room to wither away in. Derek immediately interrupted her, his voice harsh and unforgiving. He explicitly forbade spending their newly acquired wealth on my comfort. Derek told Valerie that luxury care was a complete waste of capital. He pointed out that people in my fabricated condition required locked doors and constant psychiatric monitoring. He had already spoken to a contact at a chronically underfunded state-run psychiatric ward located 3 hours outside the city. It was a grim facility known for heavy chemical restraints and horrific living conditions. Derek coldly calculated that the state facility would absorb my basic Social Security checks, eliminating any out-of-pocket expenses for them. He told Valerie to endure my presence for 1 more month. Once the judge declared me incompetent, they would have me legally dragged out of the mansion by medical transport. They would lock me away in a bleak concrete room. He assured her the heavy doses of antipsychotics would guarantee I never had a moment of clarity again. He chuckled, telling his wife I would not remember my own name by Christmas. Valerie remained silent, processing the horrific reality of dumping her father into a nightmare. I waited, praying for a single shred of humanity to surface. Instead, I heard her softly clink her glass against Derek's. She agreed. I removed the headphones, my hands shaking from a profound, terrifying adrenaline. The betrayal was absolute. They were actively constructing my living tomb. They were going to steal my fortune, finance a Miami mistress, and leave me to rot in a chemical prison where my screams would be completely ignored. The precise cruelty stripped away every remaining ounce of paternal hesitation I held. I was no longer dealing with family. I was dealing with parasites who intended to consume their host. I walked over to the small reinforced safe I had installed beneath the floorboards of my closet. I opened the heavy steel door and pulled out my original estate documents. I gathered the blueprints of my commercial properties, the deep financial ledgers, and the certified toxicology report. I stacked the evidence neatly on my desk. Every single document was a loaded weapon. I retrieved my secure burner phone and powered it on dialing Mitchell's direct line. The time for waiting and gathering intelligence was officially over. It was time to strike before they could file their fabricated documents with the court. Mitchell answered immediately, his voice sharp and alert. I told him the entire scope of the conservatorship plot. I detailed the involvement of Dr. Aris, and the impending fraudulent loans against my commercial warehouses. I heard my old friend curse quietly under his breath, recognizing the extreme danger of a legal conservatorship. If they filed that paperwork before we acted the legal battle to reverse, it would be incredibly long and potentially impossible given the false medical records they had manufactured. Mitchell, I need you to accelerate the timeline. I ordered, my voice ringing with the authority of a man going to war. I need the asset freeze injunctions filed the absolute second the courthouse opens on Monday morning. I need the restraining orders against Derek and Valerie finalized. And I want the district attorney notified of the massive corporate fraud and prescription tampering. We are dropping the hammer right now. Mitchell agreed, his tone reflecting my cold urgency. He promised to have a team of corporate litigators and criminal defense specialists ready. He told me to pack a bag and leave the mansion before the weekend was over, assuring me a secure location had been arranged for my safety. I declined his offer to run. I wanted to be standing in the center of the living room when the police arrived. I wanted to look my daughter directly in the eyes when her stolen world was ripped away from her. I spent the rest of the night packing my essential items into a small, nondescript duffel bag, leaving it hidden in the corner. I laid back down on my bed, staring up at the ceiling, where my captors slept peacefully. They thought they had secured a brilliant, flawless victory. They believed the clueless old man was quietly fading into the dark, but the foundation of their entire existence was about to be violently detonated, and I was going to ensure that not a single piece of their lives remained intact. I closed my eyes and waited. The morning sun had barely begun filtering through the basement windows when my encrypted laptop pinged with a new automated audio file. The surveillance system we installed the night before was programmed to alert me whenever ambient noise exceeded a specific threshold. I sat up in bed, my joints stiff from the chill, and reached for my headphones. I clicked the playback icon, bracing myself for another round of their casual cruelty. The recording was time-stamped at 2 a.m. The clinking of glasses had stopped, replaced by the sharp sounds of a keyboard clicking. Derek was speaking, his voice carrying a manic, deeply arrogant energy. He told Valerie he had just received the final confirmation emails from their private travel concierge. Valerie let out a soft, delighted gasp. She asked for specific details, her tone vibrating with unadulterated greed. Derek proudly announced that he had successfully booked 2 one-way first-class tickets to Paris, departing exactly 24 hours after the scheduled conservatorship hearing. He detailed their lavish itinerary. They would spend 2 weeks celebrating their newly acquired wealth in a luxury penthouse overlooking the Seine River, followed by a permanent relocation to the Mediterranean coast. He assured her the offshore banking channels were primed to receive the massive influx of capital from my fraudulently mortgaged commercial properties. Valerie asked almost as an afterthought about the logistics of my physical transfer to the state-run psychiatric facility. Derek dismissed her concern with a cruel, barking laugh. He explained that the private medical transport team was already fully compensated. They would arrive at the mansion, forcibly restrain me under the guise of an uncontrollable dementia episode, and transport me directly to the locked ward. He joked that the facility was so severely underfunded that they would confiscate my personal belongings immediately. He guaranteed I would not have access to a telephone to call a lawyer. They were not simply planning to steal my fortune and lock me away. They were planning to abandon me on a different continent, actively ensuring I would die alone, heavily sedated and entirely forgotten in a sterile concrete box. I sat in the dim light of my basement, letting the audio file loop a second time. I felt a profound shift occur deep within the center of my chest. Any lingering fragment of paternal hesitation I might have harbored was instantly eradicated. For days, I had operated under the protective shield of shock and defensive rage. Now, a freezing, absolute clarity washed over my nervous system. I realized with terrifying certainty that there was nothing left to salvage of my family. The young girl I had taught to ride a bicycle, the daughter I had proudly walked down the aisle, no longer existed. She had been entirely consumed by a monstrous parasite. I was looking at two incredibly dangerous predators actively tightening a lethal snare around my neck. They had meticulously calculated the value of my life and decided it was merely a stepping stone to a first-class cabin. I slowly removed the headphones, placing them gently on the wooden desk. I did not feel sorrow. I felt the immense, terrifying power of the man who has completely detached himself from his emotional vulnerabilities. I stood up, walked to the bathroom mirror, and splashed cold water on my face. I needed to be sharper than I had ever been in my professional career. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me look slightly disheveled to maintain the illusion for the security cameras. I walked up to the kitchen, performed my shuffling routine for Valerie as she sipped her expensive espresso, and mumbled an excuse about wanting to sit in the backyard garden. Once safely outside, I bypassed the digital surveillance domes, slipped through the side gate, and walked briskly down the street to hail a taxi. The Rusty Spoon Diner was a relic nestled deep in the industrial district far away from the glossy neighborhoods Valerie and Derek frequented. The air smelled of old coffee and fried grease. I walked through the heavy glass door at exactly 2:00. I spotted Mitchell immediately. He was sitting in the furthest booth in the back corner, wearing a sharp gray suit that looked entirely out of place in the rundown establishment. He had a thick leather briefcase resting on the cracked vinyl seat beside him. I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my posture rigid and my expression unreadable. Mitchell ordered 2 black coffees from a passing waitress before leaning across the sticky table. He told me the emergency injunctions were drafted and ready to be filed with the federal court. He had coordinated with a team of aggressive corporate litigators and criminal prosecutors. He assured me that the moment we submitted the evidence, Derek and Valerie would be arrested for financial fraud, elder abuse, and attempted chemical endangerment. He looked at me with deep concern, asking if I was truly ready to pull the trigger and send my only daughter to a federal penitentiary. I looked back at my oldest friend, my face a mask of stone. I calmly recounted the final audio file I had captured just hours earlier. I detailed the one-way first-class tickets to Paris, the relocation plan, and their laughing dismissal of my impending confinement in a locked psychiatric ward. I watched the blood drain from Mitchell's face as he registered the magnitude of their cruelty. His professional demeanor cracked, replaced by genuine visceral horror. He reached for his heavy leather briefcase, his hands moving with frantic, angry energy. He stated we needed to call the district attorney immediately. He wanted them in handcuffs before the sun went down. I raised my hand, stopping him instantly. I told him we were not filing police reports yet. Simply throwing them into a jail cell was too easy and swift. If we arrested them now, the banks would freeze everything, the loans would cancel, and they would cry for sympathy. I wanted them to feel the terror they had planned for me. I pulled a blueprint from my pocket and spread it across the table. I looked Mitchell in the eyes and formulated a perfectly legal, destructive financial maneuver. I explained that Derek was relying on my commercial properties to collateralize his fraudulent loans. He needed those buildings to act as the concrete foundation for his stolen millions. I instructed Mitchell to transfer the titles of all 3 warehouses into an irrevocable blind trust, an entity immune to outside claims. We would execute the transfer the second before Derek's loans were officially approved. By the time the capital hit Derek's accounts, the collateral backing them would vanish. The commercial bank would trigger a catastrophic default clause. They would aggressively target Derek and Valerie. They would seize the mansion, liquidate their accounts, and destroy their financial existence. I wanted them to board their flight only to have their cards declined at the gate, surrounded by agents holding warrants for bank fraud. I told him to prepare the trust documents. We would let them steal an absolute fortune and then expertly remove the floor from beneath their feet. I left the diner that afternoon with a singular, terrifying focus. Monday morning arrived with a cold rain that washed the Seattle streets clean. I was sitting in Mitchell's private downtown office long before his support staff arrived. We sat in the quiet boardroom surrounded by thick glass and heavy oak, and we began the systematic dismantling of my treacherous family. The first step required pure, unadulterated capital, the kind of liquid wealth that leaves absolutely no paper trail for Derek to uncover. Decades ago, during a highly lucrative international engineering project, I had established a private, secure holding account in Zurich. It was a completely legal, tax-compliant reservoir of emergency funds that I had simply never touched, and more importantly, never mentioned to Valerie. I authorized Mitchell to liquidate the entire account. Within 2 hours, a massive sum of clean, untraceable capital was wired directly into a newly formed domestic entity. We named it Obsidian Asset Management, a blind limited liability company registered in a corporate-friendly state, deliberately designed to obscure its true ownership. On paper, Obsidian Asset Management was just another aggressive, faceless private equity firm looking to acquire distressed real estate portfolios. In reality, it was a highly targeted precision weapon pointed directly at my daughter's lavish lifestyle. With the corporate vehicle fully operational and heavily funded, Mitchell deployed his senior financial analysts to probe the exact status of the massive mansion Valerie and Derek called their home. The multi-million-dollar estate in the gated community was the physical manifestation of their arrogant pride. They loved to host extravagant parties there, projecting an image of immense self-made success. However, beneath the polished marble floors and the imported chandeliers, the foundation was severely cracked. They did not own the property outright. They were currently carrying a remaining 20% mortgage, a substantial sum they had carelessly ignored while draining their income to fund Derek's failing business and his Miami mistress. This remaining mortgage was the critical, vulnerable load-bearing pillar I needed to strike. Mitchell's team quickly discovered a beautiful, fatal flaw in Derek's recent financial maneuvering. When Derek had desperately attempted to use my 3 commercial warehouses as cross-collateral for his new fraudulent loans, he had been forced to submit comprehensive personal financial disclosures to the commercial lenders. He had aggressively overstated his assets and blatantly lied about his liquidity. In the rigidly structured world of high finance, this constitutes a severe violation of the standard covenants attached to his primary residential mortgage. By actively attempting a massive fraud to secure new capital, Derek had unknowingly triggered a cross-default clause hidden deep within the fine print of his original home loan. His mortgage was now in a state of technical default. The bank holding the note on their spectacular mansion had not yet initiated formal foreclosure proceedings, but the debt had been internally classified as highly toxic and severely distressed. Banks are profoundly risk-averse institutions. They despise holding on to toxic paper, especially when it is tied to a client who is exhibiting highly erratic, fraudulent borrowing patterns across multiple lenders. This was the exact vulnerability we had anticipated, and it was time to drive the wedge straight into the cracks of their crumbling empire. I sat perfectly still as Mitchell initiated the conference call with the senior asset managers at Derek's bank. Mitchell spoke with the cold, ruthless efficiency of a corporate shark. He represented Obsidian Asset Management, an aggressive firm willing to purchase the distressed promissory note immediately in cash, taking the toxic asset completely off the bank's ledger. The bankers were more than eager to eliminate the high-risk exposure. They did not care who was buying the debt, as long as the capital was verified and the transaction was clean. They tripped over themselves to offload the troubled mortgage. The negotiations were very brief. We purchased the entire promissory note at a slight premium to ensure rapid, unquestioned execution. The electronic signatures were applied, the massive wire transfer was authorized from the Obsidian accounts, and the heavy legal documents were permanently recorded. By 3:00 that afternoon, the transaction was fully sealed. I stared at the thick stack of freshly printed contracts resting on Mitchell's mahogany conference table. The ink was dry, but the legal reality was absolute and indestructible. I reached out and touched the heavy paper, feeling a dark, profound satisfaction radiating through my hands. Valerie and Derek believed they were the brilliant masters of their own luxurious universe. They thought they owned the soaring ceilings, the manicured gardens, and the expensive hardwood floors they confidently walked across every single day. They were preparing to lock me in a grim concrete psychiatric ward and fly away to Europe entirely convinced that their spectacular home would be waiting for them upon their eventual return. They had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer just the wealthy, disposable father they were actively trying to drug into submission. I was no longer the pathetic, trembling old man shuffling around their kitchen. Through the impenetrable corporate veil of Obsidian Asset Management, I was now officially their bank. I owned their heavy, distressed debt. I held the absolute, unquestionable legal right to their spectacular mansion. Because they were currently in technical default, they were in active breach of their most critical financial contract. I held the ultimate power to instantly accelerate the loan, demanding the entire remaining balance be paid in full immediately. When they inevitably failed to produce the capital, I possessed the legal authority to seize the property, lock the doors, and throw them out into the cold streets with absolutely nothing but the expensive designer clothes on their backs. They would be left entirely destitute, stripped of the unearned luxury they flaunted with such sickening pride. I walked over to the expansive window in Mitchell's office, looking down at the busy rain-soaked streets of the city below. I thought about the blue triangular pills hidden in my daughter's apron pocket. I thought about the forged medical records sitting in Dr. Aris' polished briefcase. I thought about the 24-year-old mistress laughing in a luxury Miami condominium funded by my grandson's fictitious illness. They had spent months methodically weaving a complex, venomous web of deceit, betrayal, and unspeakable cruelty. They had constructed a massive, arrogant tower of lies, firmly believing I was too weak and too foolish to notice the shadows closing in around me. But they had made the most fatal, arrogant miscalculation possible. They had foolishly targeted a master engineer. I had not simply dodged their falling bricks. I had quietly stepped into the basement of their lives and meticulously rewired the entire foundation with high explosives. The financial charges were perfectly set. The legal triggers were primed and securely locked into place. The trap was now inescapable and absolute. All that remained was the final devastating press of the detonation button. I turned back to Mitchell, a cold, empty smile spreading across my face. I told him to finalize the commercial trust transfers. I was absolutely ready to watch them burn completely. I returned to my basement suite the following morning, the heavy rain outside mirroring the cold, calculated precision that now dictated my every movement. The monumental financial maneuver I had executed with Mitchell was silently setting roots deep within the legal banking infrastructure. Obsidian Asset Management now officially owned the massive suffocating debt attached to the luxurious property directly above my head. Derek and Valerie were living in a fragile glass house entirely oblivious to the heavy wrecking ball swinging directly toward their walls. I sat in my worn recliner listening to the rhythmic hum of the furnace, mentally preparing for the final phase of their self-orchestrated destruction. Mitchell had warned me that desperate people take desperate measures when they firmly believe their window of opportunity is rapidly closing. I knew they would attempt one last, aggressive push to secure total control before their fabricated conservatorship hearing was officially scheduled. I did not have to wait long for their next calculated move. Around 10 o'clock, the heavy wooden door at the top of the basement stairs creaked open. I heard the slow, deliberate rhythm of footsteps descending the wooden treads. It was a calculated, heavy walk, intentionally designed to project immense sorrow and deep carrying burden. Valerie stepped into the dim light of my living quarters. She was dressed in a soft, oversized cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back loosely, her face completely stripped of its usual vibrant makeup. It was a masterful, highly theatrical presentation of an exhausted, devoted daughter, carrying the immense weight of the world on her shoulders. She held a thick manila folder clutched tightly against her chest. I remained seated in my recliner, letting my shoulders slump forward, forcing my breathing to become shallow and uneven. I widened my eyes, projecting the hollow, vacant stare of an old man whose cognitive foundation was severely crumbling. "Dad," Valerie whispered, her voice trembling with a perfectly calibrated, artificial fragility. She crossed the room and knelt on the carpet beside my chair, placing her warm hand gently over my cold knuckles. "Are you awake? Did you sleep well down here?" I blinked slowly, letting a long, vacant moment pass, before I turned my head to look at her. I slept. I mumbled, my voice intentionally raspy and weak. "But my mind feels incredibly foggy today, Valerie. Everything feels so distant and heavy." Valerie squeezed my hand, letting a single meticulously manufactured tear slide down her pale cheek. "I know, Dad," she said softly, her voice thick with fake emotion. "Derek and I have been so incredibly worried about you lately. We see how much you are struggling to remember simple things, how confused you get during the day. It breaks my heart to watch you fight this terrible decline alone." She paused, letting the heavy silence fill the room, ensuring her words sank deep into my supposedly fragile mind. She opened the manila folder, sliding a crisp white legal document onto my lap. "That is why I am here, Dad," she continued, her tone shifting into a gentle, reassuring cadence. "I want to help you. I want to take all this heavy burden off your tired shoulders. This is just a simple medical proxy and financial assistance form. It just gives me the legal ability to talk to your doctors, pick up your new prescriptions, and help manage the complex bank accounts so you do not have to worry about missing any important payments. It is just a safety net, Dad. Just until you feel stronger and your memory comes back to you." I stared down at the dense legal jargon printed on the page. It was not a simple medical proxy. It was a comprehensive, irrevocable power of attorney. It was the absolute surrender of my entire estate, my physical autonomy, and my legal rights. It was the key to their European escape, the final document they needed to empty my massive accounts before they officially locked me away in a state-run psychiatric facility. I looked up at her, eyes brimming with entirely fabricated, desperate gratitude. "You are such a good daughter, Valerie," I whispered, letting my chin tremble slightly. "I do not know what I would do without you and Derek looking out for me." Valerie smiled, a sweet, comforting expression that entirely masked the venomous predator lurking directly beneath her skin. "You never have to worry about being alone, Dad," she lied smoothly. "We are going to take perfect care of you. Just sign right here on the bottom line, and I will handle absolutely everything else." She reached into her pocket to retrieve a pen, but I slowly raised my trembling left hand to stop her. "It is okay, sweetheart," I mumbled, reaching into my own breast pocket. "I have my lucky pen right here." I pulled out a sleek, heavy silver fountain pen. To Valerie, it looked like a standard high-end writing instrument, the kind a retired civil engineer might carry for decades. She had absolutely no idea that this specific pen was a highly specialized tool provided to me by Mitchell during our covert meeting at the diner. It was a sophisticated friction pen engineered with a highly volatile thermosensitive chemical compound. The ink flowed dark and rich onto the paper, indistinguishable from standard ballpoint ink. However, the chemical structure was incredibly unstable at average room temperature. Within exactly 24 hours of exposure to the ambient air, the molecular bonds of the ink would completely dissolve, rendering the signature entirely invisible. The paper would revert to a pristine blank state, leaving absolutely no trace of pressure or residue. It was a magnificent piece of deceptive technology designed perfectly for a moment exactly like this. I uncapped the heavy silver pen, my hands shaking with a flawless, Oscar-worthy performance of a terrified, declining old man. I slowly lowered the tip to the signature line at the bottom of the irrevocable power of attorney document. I pressed the nib against the crisp white paper, intentionally making my signature jagged, slow, and unsteady, perfectly mimicking the declining motor skills associated with severe neurological decay. I carefully traced every letter of my name, ensuring the dark, rich ink soaked deeply into the fibers of the document. Valerie watched my trembling hand with breathless, greedy anticipation. I could practically hear her heart pounding with dark excitement. As I completed the final loop of my surname, she let out a long, quiet sigh of profound relief. The trap she had meticulously built over months of deceit was finally snapping shut. I placed the cap back on the silver pen, my breathing heavy and labored. I slowly handed the signed document back to my daughter. "There you go, Valerie," I whispered softly, leaning my head back against the worn fabric of the recliner. "Thank you for being so strong for me. Thank you for protecting your old father." Valerie eagerly snatched the document from my trembling fingers, her eyes quickly scanning the dark, jagged signature at the bottom of the page. A massive, triumphant smile spread across her face, completely shattering the illusion of the sorrowful, grieving daughter. She had exactly what she wanted. She had the absolute key to my entire life and work. "I love you so much, Dad," Valerie said quickly, sliding the signed document back into the thick manila folder and clutching it tightly against her chest. "You just close your eyes and rest now. Do not worry about a single thing. I am going to take this directly to the lawyer right now so we can get all the new accounts properly organized. You are completely safe now." She stood up smoothly, her previous theatrical exhaustion instantly vanishing, replaced by a surge of manic, victorious energy. She turned away from me, walking briskly toward the basement stairs. She did not look back. She did not offer another comforting word. Her objective was achieved, and I was immediately discarded. I sat perfectly still in the dim light of the basement, listening to her rapid footsteps ascending the wooden staircase. I heard the heavy door click shut, followed by the muffled, excited sound of her voice echoing through the floorboards as she immediately called Derek to announce their absolute victory. I remained in the recliner, staring at the empty space where she had knelt just moments before. I slowly raised my hand and wiped the fabricated tears from my cheeks. The trembling in my fingers instantly ceased. My posture straightened, and the fog of artificial dementia completely evaporated from my eyes. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the heavy silver friction pen. I turned it over, feeling the cold, solid metal against my palm. Valerie was currently rushing to a notary, carrying a document that contained my legal surrender. She would undoubtedly file the paperwork, believing she had successfully secured her opulent future. She had absolutely no idea at all that she held a ticking time bomb. The morning sun broke through the heavy Seattle fog, casting long, pale shadows across the basement floor. I listened to the frantic, joyful sounds echoing from the floorboards above. Valerie and Derek were rushing around the master suite, getting dressed for a lavish afternoon outing. They had loudly announced during breakfast that they were attending a business lunch in the city to celebrate a major milestone in the career of Derek. I knew exactly what milestone they were truly celebrating. They were toasting to my supposed mental demise and their imminent unearned wealth. I had sat at the kitchen island, hunched over a bowl of oatmeal, staring blankly at the marble counter, while Valerie patted my shoulder with sickening sweetness. I played the hollow shell of a man, perfectly letting my eyes glaze over as they practically danced out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut, and the electronic deadbolt clicked into place. The house fell beautifully silent. I stood up from the kitchen stool. The stooped posture, the trembling hands, and the vacant stare vanished. I walked back down the basement stairs for the very last time. My mind was perfectly clear, operating with the cold, ruthless efficiency of a demolition expert executing a final countdown. I pulled my suitcase from beneath the bed. I did not have much to take. Over the past 3 years, they had systematically stripped away my personal belongings, replacing my history with generic, sterile furniture to make me feel like a temporary resident in my own life. I packed a few tailored suits, some comfortable clothes, my essential engineering tools, and the framed photograph of my late wife. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet room. I then spent the next hour meticulously cleaning the basement suite. I wiped down the counters, stripped the bed, and vacuumed the floor. I erased every trace of the frail, dependent old man they believed I had become. I wanted them to return and find a sterile, empty space, I wanted the physical emptiness of the room to mirror the devastating void they were about to experience in their own lives. When I was satisfied with the immaculate state of the basement, I grabbed my suitcase and walked up the stairs, leaving the door wide open behind me. I walked through the expansive living room, my footsteps heavy and deliberate on the imported hardwood floors. I entered the pristine home office of Valerie. It was a room designed purely for aesthetic dominance, featuring a massive glass desk, white leather chairs, and shelves lined with unread decorative books. I placed my suitcase by the door and approached her perfectly organized desk. I carried a thick, heavy manila envelope in my left hand. This was the payload. This was the precise instrument of their absolute destruction. I carefully opened the clasp of the envelope and slid the documents out, arranging them in a very specific, deliberate sequence on the center of the glass desk. I wanted the psychological impact to be layered, escalating from shock to absolute terror. The first document I placed precisely in the center was the official notice from Obsidian Asset Management. It was printed on heavy watermarked legal paper. It detailed the immediate acceleration of their mortgage note due to cross-default violations and blatant financial fraud. It stated clearly that Obsidian Asset Management, an entity completely owned and operated by Harrison Vales, was seizing the property. The bold black text at the bottom gave them exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises before law enforcement would physically remove them. There would be no negotiation, no extensions, and no legal loopholes. They were being violently evicted from their own fraudulent castle by the man they thought they had chemically lobotomized. Beside the foreclosure notice, I laid down the second layer of their ruin. I spread out a series of high-resolution glossy photographs the private investigator of Mitchell had captured in Florida. They showed Derek laughing on the balcony of the luxury Miami condominium, holding a glass of champagne with his arm wrapped tightly around his young, beautiful mistress. I placed the detailed wire transfer receipts directly beneath the photos. These documents explicitly traced the $15,000 I had given Derek to supposedly save the life of my grandson straight into the leasing office of that beachfront apartment. Valerie had already accepted his infidelity in exchange for a massive payout, but seeing the visual proof of his betrayal, coupled with the realization that the promised payout was now completely gone, would shatter whatever toxic alliance they had formed. Derek had no money, no business, and now no secret getaway. Finally, I placed the most devastating documents on top of the pile. I laid down the certified toxicology report from the independent laboratory, highlighting the lethal levels of off-label antipsychotic sedatives present in the blue triangular pills. Next to the lab report, I placed the freshly stamped copies of the federal criminal complaints Mitchell and I had filed that very morning. These were not mere civil lawsuits. These were comprehensive, undeniable criminal charges submitted directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the State Medical Board, and the Department of Elder Affairs. The documents detailed a massive coordinated conspiracy to commit elder abuse, wire fraud, medical malpractice, and attempted manslaughter. Dr. Aris was named as a primary conspirator. His medical license would be immediately suspended, and his practice would be raided by federal agents before the week was over. Valerie and Derek were named as the primary architects of the criminal enterprise. The audio transcripts outlining their plan to drug me, forge my signature, and lock me in a state-run psychiatric facility were attached as physical exhibits. I highlighted the section where they explicitly discussed abandoning me to die while they fled to Europe on one-way first-class tickets. I stood back and surveyed the glass desk. The manila envelope rested empty on the side. The documents formed a perfect, undeniable mosaic of their profound guilt and absolute ruin. There was no room for denial. There was no space for manipulation. They could not charm their way out of federal indictments and total financial annihilation. The paper trail was flawless, secured by the very technology they had ignored and the intelligence they had deeply underestimated. I pulled my silver friction pen from my pocket, the same pen I had used to sign their worthless medical proxy just 24 hours ago. I took a plain white notepad from the drawer and wrote a brief final message. I did not write a long emotional letter. I did not demand apologies or express my profound heartbreak. I simply wrote, "The old man is no longer clueless. You have 72 hours to leave my house before the federal marshals arrive. Do not attempt to contact me." I placed the note perfectly in the center of the glossy photographs. I placed the cap back on my silver pen and slipped it into my coat pocket. I took one last look around the opulent home office. It felt entirely foreign to me now. It was merely a monument to greed and betrayal. I picked up my suitcase from the doorway and walked down the main hallway toward the front door. I deactivated the security system using the master code I had secretly retained. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out onto the wide stone porch. The Seattle rain had intensified, washing the manicured driveway in a cold, steady downpour. The freezing air hit my lungs, feeling sharper and cleaner than it had in over 3 years. I did not look back at the massive, luxurious house. It was no longer my home. It was simply a crime scene waiting for the authorities to arrive. A sleek black town car was idling quietly at the end of the long driveway, exactly where Mitchell had arranged for it to be. I walked down the wet pavement, my footsteps steady and rhythmic. The driver stepped out, opening the rear door for me and taking my single suitcase. I slid into the warm leather seat, pulling the heavy door shut. As the large car rolled forward, pulling out of the gated community and merging onto the busy highway, I felt the crushing, suffocating weight of the past 3 years simply lift off my chest. I had walked into that house as a grieving father desperately seeking the love of a broken family. I was leaving it as a survivor, a man who had stared into the darkest depths of human greed and successfully engineered his own escape. The explosive payload was sitting perfectly centered on the pristine glass desk, silently ticking down to absolute zero. They had wanted to completely erase my existence and steal my entire legacy. Instead, they were about to return to a completely annihilated future. My new peaceful life had officially and finally begun right here today. The sleek black town car glided seamlessly through the morning traffic, carrying me away from the toxic epicenter of my past. The steady rhythm of the windshield wipers brushing away the cold Seattle rain felt like a metronome marking the first precious seconds of my actual freedom. I watched the dense gray skyline fade in the rearview mirror, replaced by the sprawling modern architecture of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The driver navigated toward the exclusive first-class drop-off terminal, opening my door with a respectful nod. I handed him a generous cash tip, grabbed my single, unassuming suitcase, and walked through the sliding glass doors into the brightly lit concourse. I did not feel the heavy, dragging exhaustion that had plagued my bones for the last 3 years. My stride was brisk, my posture was perfectly straight, and my mind was sharper than it had ever been in my entire professional career as a structural engineer. I effortlessly cleared the expedited security checkpoint and made my way up the carpeted stairs to the private first-class departure lounge. The atmosphere inside was a sanctuary of hushed voices, soft jazz music, and the faint, pleasant aroma of roasted coffee and fresh citrus. I found a secluded, comfortable leather armchair, positioned directly against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the busy tarmac. I settled into the plush seat, exhaling a long, deep breath of pure relief. A polite attendant in a crisp uniform approached, offering me a warm towel and a comprehensive beverage menu. I ordered a Mai Tai, savoring the sweet tropical irony of the choice. I was scheduled to board a direct, luxurious flight to Hawaii in less than 2 hours. It was a beautiful destination I had once promised my late wife. We would visit, a sacred promise I was finally keeping, albeit under completely different circumstances than we had originally planned when she was alive. The amber liquid of the cocktail arrived, catching the ambient light as I took my first slow, deliberate sip. The rum burned pleasantly down my throat, providing a warm, comforting contrast to the icy, ruthless calculations I had just successfully executed. For a very long time, I simply sat there in perfect silence, watching the massive commercial jetliners taxi across the wet pavement, lifting their immense heavy weight into the cloudy sky. I was entirely untethered from the heavy, suffocating burdens of my previous miserable existence. But I knew the spectacular shockwave I had meticulously engineered was currently detonating miles away in that pristine, fraudulent home office. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out the secure burner phone Mitchell had provided. The small digital screen was pitch dark. I pressed the power button, holding the compact device in my palm as the operating system slowly booted up. Almost immediately, the phone began to vibrate violently in my hand, a sustained, frantic buzzing that felt exactly like a captured, desperate insect trying to escape. The red notification counter rapidly climbed. I had exactly 45 missed calls. They were all routed through the encrypted forwarding number Mitchell had strategically embedded in the final eviction notice I left behind. The digital timeline painted a perfect, undeniable, and highly satisfying picture of their absolute panic. The first cluster of calls began precisely 40 minutes after I had left the mansion. That was the exact window of time I had calculated for their celebratory business lunch to conclude. They had walked back into the house feeling incredibly victorious, only to find the payload waiting on the glass desk. I ignored the missed call logs and opened the voicemail inbox. There were 5 distinct audio messages. I lifted the phone to my ear, my expression completely serene, like a man listening to a distant, irrelevant weather report. The first voicemail was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of pure, unadulterated rage. Valerie was not simply crying. She was screaming with a guttural, terrifying, and explosive intensity. The target of her absolute, unhinged fury was not me, but Derek. I heard the sharp, violent sound of thick glass shattering against a hard wall in the background. She had obviously seen the glossy, high-resolution photographs of her husband embracing his 24-year-old Miami mistress. She shrieked wildly about the $15,000, demanding to know how he could be so incredibly stupid, so entirely careless, as to leave a blatant digital trail back to his secret life. Derek was shouting over her, his voice cracking with defensive, pathetic panic, desperately trying to construct a flimsy lie that the photographs were digitally altered by me. Valerie was not listening to his pathetic excuses. Their toxic, parasitic alliance had instantly evaporated the very second the stolen money permanently vanished from their future. I pressed a small button to skip to the next message. The audio shifted dramatically. The screaming argument had completely subsided, replaced by the terrifying, suffocating realization of their impending legal doom. This time it was Derek leaving the desperate message. His usual polished, arrogant baritone was completely and utterly gone. He sounded exactly like a cornered, terrified animal. He was hyperventilating heavily, struggling to form a single coherent sentence. He stammered frantically about the cross-default notice from Obsidian Asset Management. He demanded to know how I had discovered the hidden corporate mechanisms, begging me repeatedly to call off the commercial lenders. He was practically sobbing uncontrollably as he openly admitted that his company was entirely bankrupt, pleading with me to understand that he just needed a little more time to balance the ruined ledgers. Then his voice dropped an entire octave, heavily laced with a profound, sickening, and inescapable terror. He mentioned the federal criminal complaints. He had clearly read the extensive, horrifying documentation detailing the massive wire fraud, the elder abuse, and the dark medical conspiracy. He told me that Dr. Aris was not answering his phone. The corrupt, arrogant physician had likely already been contacted by the federal authorities and was desperately attempting to sever all legal ties to their rapidly sinking ship. Derek begged me to withdraw the severe Federal Bureau of Investigation complaints. He promised to sign over absolutely everything, to willingly walk away empty-handed if I just stopped the federal indictments from moving forward. He finally realized with absolute crushing certainty that he was looking at multiple decades in a cold federal penitentiary. I skipped to the final most recent voicemail on the digital list. It had been left only 10 minutes ago. It was Valerie. The blistering rage and the arrogant entitlement had been entirely, completely stripped away. She was employing her ultimate final weapon. She was utilizing the calculated, helpless tears of a daughter crying out for her old protector. She wept into the receiver, her voice incredibly small, incredibly fragile, and completely pathetic. She sobbed uncontrollably, begging me to please come back to the beautiful house. She pleaded for her daddy to fix this terrible, catastrophic misunderstanding. She swore that the antipsychotic pills were a terrible medical error, that she only ever wanted what was absolutely best for my physical health. She cried about the massive eviction notice, her voice trembling, as she realized she was going to permanently lose her spectacular mansion, her expensive designer clothes, and her entire high society identity. She whimpered about the absolute humiliation of being thrown out into the street by federal marshals. She begged me to remember how much she loved me, how much she cared for me. She was desperately clinging to the very emotional vulnerability she had spent 3 years actively trying to weaponize and exploit. I listened to her desperate, sobbing pleas, without a single flinch of hesitation or regret. My heart remained a steady, calm, slow rhythm. I did not feel a single microscopic drop of sympathy. The woman weeping on the recording was a complete stranger, a venomous architect who had been meticulously caught all in her own lethal snare. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the digital screen. With a calm, deliberate motion of my thumb, I selected all 5 voice messages. I pressed the delete button, watching the progress bar permanently wipe their frantic terror from the memory drive. I popped the plastic back cover off the burner phone. I carefully extracted the tiny gold and black SIM card, holding it between my index finger and thumb. I looked down at my small table. I dropped the tiny piece of plastic directly into my empty Mai Tai glass. The ice cubes shifted slightly as the card settled at the bottom, perfectly submerged in the residual melted water and sweet syrup. The connection was permanently severed. I was completely unreachable, entirely untraceable, and absolutely free. I slowly turned my full attention back to the massive panoramic airport windows. The heavy, persistent Seattle rain was finally beginning to break, revealing small, promising patches of bright blue sky over the distant mountains. I calmly watched a large, heavy passenger plane forcefully accelerate down the long runway, its powerful engines roaring silently behind the thick, tinted soundproof glass of the lounge. It lifted smoothly and gracefully into the air, banking sharply toward the warm, welcoming horizon of the Pacific Ocean. I leaned back in my comfortable leather chair, adjusting my tailored cuffs, feeling the deep, profound, unparalleled satisfaction of absolute, unwavering justice. She told me the best gift I could give them was to be gone, and so I simply left. But I made sure to completely take their entire world with me.